Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Preserves. On today's video we're going to be starting a new series, and that series is going to be called Band of the Week. And this week's band is Grim Reaper from the 1980s, and then they went on to about 2022. Let's start off when they formed and their subsequent albums after that. So, in Droit, which I believe that's how you pronounce it, I'm not sure, of 1979, Nick Bocott formed Grim Reaper. And he had a guy named Paul D. Mercado or Mersado or I don't know how to pronounce his last name. And in 1981 they released their first demo album, and the first single to be released from that album was The Reaper, and that was released on Heavy Metal Records on the album Heavy Metal Heroes. Following that release of that demo album, they parted ways with Paul and picked up a whole new lineup, with the frontman now being Steve Grimmett, and they released 3 albums, one right after the other, from the years 1983 to 1987. In 1983, they released See You in Hell. See you in hell, my friend. See you in hell, my friend. Then, in 1985, they released their second studio album called Fear No Evil. You will fear no evil, yeah! Then, in 1987, they released Rock You to Hell. Rock You to Hell! Now, after they released Rock You to Hell, there was some turmoil in the band, and they ended up splitting up in 1988 due to some legal proceedings and whatnot. They disbanded, and it wasn't until 2006 when Steve Grimmett reformed the band without Nick Bocott, and due to legal issues they couldn't call it Grim Reaper anymore, so they called it Steve Grimmett's Grim Reaper. Now, they did some touring across the pond for a few years, and then in 2014 they got back together with Nick Bocott, and then they did a bunch of festivals and released another album in 2000, I believe it was 2016. But prior to that, they got a little bit more stardom in the 90s, actually, after they disbanded, and they were featured on the Beavis and Butthead show for all 3 of their previous albums, for See You in Hell, Fear No Evil, and Rock You to Hell, were all featured on the Beavis and Butthead show.
Where'd these guys get their clothes?
They bought it at that rock and roll store at the mall.
Yeah.
Now, after 2014, and when Nick Bocott got back together with the band, they, like I said, did some festivals across the pond, and in 2014 they played their first show since 1987 in the U.S. So 2 years later, after that appearance in the United States, they released a new album called Walking in the Shadows. Okay, so sorry about that interruption. I had somebody knocking at the door, totally screwed my dog up. And whatever. But anyway, back to where we were. Like I said, in 2016 they released their next studio album, and that was, like I said, Walking in the Shadows.
Walking in the shadows, deeper.
And they did a brief tour for that. And in 2017, Steve Grimmett had a infection in his leg, and that infection spread a little bit, and it got so severe that they could no longer stop the infection, and so that resulted in him having to have his the lower portion of his right leg amputated, and from then on he wore a prosthetic on any subsequent tours after that. In 2019, they released an album called At the Gates. I never personally heard many songs from this. I heard the title track, and that was about it. And so they did another small tour across the pond for this album, and in 2022 they were set to release their first live album, and that album was released in March of 2022, and it was called Reaping the Whirlwind. And so later on that year, in August, Steve Grimmett passed away on the 15th of August, and after that, they didn't release any more albums, or of course they disbanded after that and never replaced him. And so I would just like to say rip to Steve. He was one of probably in my top 20 vocalists out of the 80s for that style of power vocals and metal vocals, just because of his range of higher powerful vocals, and that like bands like Halloween and Iron Maiden, Fates Warning, and bands like that out of the 80s that were that were kind of like the power metal type genre. And so with that being said, I would just like to say, if you guys have never checked out Grim Reaper, you should probably check them out. They didn't get to the popularity of a lot of the bands from the 80s and in the metal genres, but they were one of those bands that I did listen to quite a bit in the 80s, along with a few other bands, and these bands will be brought up in this new series, Bands of the Week. I'm not sure if we'll be posting a Bands of the Week every week, but it most definitely would be at least every other week, along with the other videos that I post, like gear reviews and maybe some drumming videos and whatnot. But if you like this video, leave a comment down below and like this video and share it with your friends. I have had a quite a bit better success this year, and I thank you guys for that. In the growth of my channel, I've grown quite a bit in the last. Well, in my eyes, I've grown quite a bit in the last first couple of months of this year. It did slow down a little bit last month, but I'm still, you know, gaining some subscribers, and I thank you guys for that. And with that, I'm gonna say peace.